And welcome to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and and I got a friend Toby on here today, and he's a researcher here from around Southern Oregon area. Um, and what I wanted to do was just kind of pick his brain a little bit about some of the research that he's done, and he's also going to share at first some of the most interesting experience and finds that he has had around well, basically the areas that he's doing his research in. So you hear me okay, Toby?
Loud and clear, dude.
Awesome. All right, man. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, the research that you do, and is there a really big reason that you got into doing this in the first place?
Well, the interest in these subjects here usually springs, you know, forth when you're in childhood, either via something on TV or a book in a library, and
Mm.
all those things, happened along the way. But back in like 2006 or seven, my son and I were on a very light hike in an area in a suburb just right outside of Springfield, Oregon, known as the Thurston Cliffs, which a lot of underage drinking goes on up on these cliffs, and we kind of knew that we were there during school hours, so probably wasn't going to run into much. But anyway, my son had a keen eye, like a lot of the children do, and found a footprint, and it was, an interesting enough direction. It was headed through the blackberry brambles that I thought, well, that's either a bear or it's a hoax. And so we had the mind to put a scale object next to it and take a photograph. I think it was like in a February, so it was crisp ice mud. And so it was just a very interesting five-toed track heading into blackberries, and it started a conversation. And at the time, I was going to a church with a guy named Ron Olson, who filmed that movie Sasquatch out in the Three Sisters Wilderness, and it was
Yep.
kind of a takeoff of the Roger. Yeah. So anyway, he actually still around the Mohawk Valley. He actually lives over by Autumn Williams now. And anyway, he said, I'll take a look at your print, but I'm not into the subject anymore. And maybe we'll talk about that later, how these guys that have researched this stuff for years and years suddenly quit researching. He was one of those guys. And he goes, you might want to take this more seriously and just start talking to witnesses. But I suggest looking into long-term witnesses, people, and these are all phrases I'd never heard before, interviewing witnesses, long-term witnesses was just brand new to me. And so I end up talking to someone that he referred to me. And as we start discussing, his experiences, he said, well, I'll just take you out. And so once he took me out, man, it was game on. And, it fits a personality profile. If you have that hunger for adventure and that, adreno dump starts happening and you have a little bit of alpha male and some free time, this phenomena, this hobby will find you out.
Hmm.
So that's how it started. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, do you do a lot of your research around where you're from?
Right. Yeah. So I live in a great spot. The Willamette Valley is an hour and a half from everything. All reports come generally within an hour and a half of where I am. I have, the luxury of having 3 days off a week. And so if I need to get out to an area, I can kind of schedule things around to do that. But I'm a long haul truck driver. I work from, Springfield, Oregon on up to Tacoma, Washington. But in my off hours, I'm usually trying to gear up for a next camping trip or something, related in and around this subject matter. But, some of the first interviews that I ever took were what I call cold calls, where I knew the areas where people reported stuff happening,
Hmm.
but I didn't have access. This was 2008. There's no international web superhighway for me to lean on. Blog Talk had
No.
just begun, and Blog Talk is still very undependable. Back then, it was even more so. So to hear, a Bigfoot podcast, you really had to seek them out and seek out where things were. And so I just went headlong into the whole thing. I started putting all of my reserve capital as a U of O student towards having conferences and getting to know these researchers so I could better ingratiate myself into reports. But doing cold calls was just literally that. You see an interesting area, you see a house out in that area. Well, you just pull over and you knock on the door, or you see them out, moving debris or with their burn pile. You just pull over and ask them about the area, and they're all too willing to tell you about their experience. And most people have something to say. It's just whether or not they trust you enough, or if they're drunk enough to tell you the real story. Yeah. Those are usually the two: trust and alcohol.
Nice. So you do a lot of your stuff, say, up around Willamette National Forest?
Yeah. So anywhere in the Cascade Range. I haven't hit up the coastal range, but the Cascade Range is, just really a fantastic area to be, even if anything didn't happen. So you can just guarantee a beautiful, 5 or 6 hours if that's all you got, or a weekend or a weekday jaunt. But the Willamette drainage and the McKenzie drainage, all the way up to the Three Sisters boundary, which would be pushing back, up against the Oak Ridge area. So people are familiar with Oak Ridge on towards the west. It's kind of the area. And then, you've got place names out there. Henry Franzoni, who wrote Spirit of Seatco, he suggested that place names. And that was the first thing I really ever remember, is that if you're new to this, look for crazy names in the woods and go there, because that's how he started. Yeah. I think he went to like Devil's Ridge or Devil's Valley or something like that. But, Henry would tell these other
there's
ancillary.
So many of them. I mean, not to interrupt you, but I mean, it's like we got a lot of those in Oregon, Washington.
Oh, yeah.
It's things, devil this, demon that, giant, it's just everywhere.
Yeah, it's just a matter of, how willing you are to zoom in on Google Earth. And if you can zoom in, low enough to the ground, you can find some interesting names that they still keep coming to me. I'm still amazed, like Chimpanzee Valley, or, what was another good one that I heard recently? They just keep going, it's just word of mouth. And some of these places, they just don't see the light of day as far as humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, mm-hmm. Exactly.
So that's what I started hitting up, are these place names. And then I started putting on conferences. I did, I say 2.5 of them. And, once those started to kind of take off, I thought, well, I want to do this every month. And so I started doing something up in McKenzie at a place called Ike Pizza called Bigfoot and Beer. And this
I know that.
Just as finding, just as big, finding Bigfoot and Monster Quest were kind of colliding. Monster Quest was ending. Cliff got his season 1, and I was like, well, let's start doing this Bigfoot and Beer, and we'll interview actual witnesses from the McKenzie area and have guest speakers out. And so they started showing up, man. And that's when it all kind of took off. As soon as I did Bigfoot and Beer, and I think it was like 2010 or 11, we did about 1.5 years of those. And the greatest reports started walking into this pizza parlor. And that's when we started taking this to a whole different level of
I've been
understanding.
Yeah. In there.
Yeah. This was before it changed owners quite a few times, but there was a witness working the register, a guy named John Clinton, and he had ran into a set of they're like 22 to 24 inch tracks, and he had a face to face with one less than like 12 inches.
That wasn't the London tracks, was it?
No. So the London tracks were something that I can get into after this point, but the London tracks were in Cottage Groves, and that's about 30 minutes from me. In fact, we were just in that area
Yeah,
last
same
night.
here. It's about 35, 40 minutes from me.
Okay.
I'm
Oh,
in
cool.
Roseburg, so I'm not far from you. I'm an hour
Okay.
away
Yeah.
from
No. No. Yeah. Well, that's probably how you met Daryl. Then, just by
you. Daryl.
proximity.
Yeah, Daryl went to church with me a couple times down here in Roseburg, and he lived here. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, Daryl is a great guy, and he's like many of the people I talked to that would come into Ike's.
Mhm.
I'll tell you a few stories here. That, won't blow the average researcher's socks off. In fact, I've told the story so much that it doesn't blow my socks off that much anymore, just because this stuff happens. But I had a husband and wife approach me while we were filming an episode at the bar there, and they stood in the background. They approached me and a gal named Beth Heikkinen out of the parking lot, and her name was Mary, and I forget his name. And anyway, they were very shook up about something, but they didn't want any cameras in their face. And they went on to tell this incredible story about how down the highway, less than like 5 miles, they had Sasquatch. In fact, they had a family of them. And Mary was all too acquainted with the phenomena because she had seen one when she was a little girl on the coastline. But now here they are in the hills, and they're trying to raise prize pit bulls. And the pit bulls were, high dollar pit bulls. Anyway, they noticed that the pit bulls would curl up in their cages at night, and that seemed to be when things would amp up as soon as the sun went down. And I forget the guy's name, but he was saying, pretty much validating the fact that he was a skeptic about his wife's initial experience. But he says, there's somebody or something, a group of somebodies running back and forth at lightning speed from east to west on the
Oh, wow.
back end of our property. And I've gotten to the point where, I've start taking pot shots out in the woods, and I've got kids, and it's not safe to be near the highway shooting at something you don't know about. So if you guys want to come
Yeah.
out there and see these weird footsteps going up the hillside, and I said, well, yeah, when can we come? So closed up shop at Ike's, said our goodbyes to everybody, and Beth and I went up there to interview these two witnesses and their family. And they had it all. They had, stick structures that were bound together with pitch and mud, almost like there was a Hobby Lobby craft store going on up in the woods, just very ornate, interesting structures that somebody made with fingers and thumbs. And then these large footsteps from something coming up and down the hillside. And I shouldn't say footsteps, they were stairways that were impacted earth going up and down the side of this little town up in the McKenzie.
Mhm.
And so we spent the evening there and kind of broke the family apart and interviewed them separately. And, incredible stories about, Sasquatch sitting on their property, watching their kids. You could see the areas where they were hanging out, looking at the kids in the bay window. The kids were validating everything that mom and dad were saying. And I said, okay,
Wow.
I need to take a step back here,
Do you
And
mind
so,
sharing kind of an area general?
yeah, so north of Leeburg and south of Blue River. So
Okay.
that whole area between Blue River and Springfield is just, there's a really nice ridgeway that just goes all the way out to the Sisters Wilderness. If you were to walk the peaks of the mountain range there, you probably wouldn't
Yeah, I was gonna
wander
kind
to
of just
anything.
kind of hone in on here and see if we can get a little something on screen here.
Oh, and so you're doing like a virtual map right now?
I'm about to, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that was the first area where I really had a playground to work off of. But because I sensed a little bit of substance abuse off of her husband, I was a little bit nervous to research in that
Hmm.
particular area. And so we started to take a step back. In fact, I took about, I don't know, 2 months before I called them. I kind of thought about how to approach that mountain. So I did a cold call, and I knocked on, there's an old double wide about 4 houses down from him. And I knocked on this guy's door out of nowhere. And this old dude opens the door. It turns out that he was like on SEAL Team 2 back, in the Pearl Harbor days before the SEALs were around. And super cool guy in his 90s. And his name was Earl. And his daughter's name was Candy. And so we just started BSing. And I said, hey, is there any chance that me and my son could start hiking on your mountain there? And I didn't mention anything about Bigfoot. He pretty much said, well, if you go in that mountain, you need to be careful. And I said, well, what, cougars? He goes, no, there's something coming down from that mountain in our backyard. And he goes, are you interested in Bigfoot? And I said, well, how'd you guess? He goes, well, I saw that sticker, on the front of your car. And, it's kind of obvious what you want to do. And he goes, I just point blank ask you how they come down from the mountain and their tracks can disappear in the snow. So this is where there was a big shift, right? Because I had, a flesh and blood person down the way here pretty much. And now I had this story about someone telling me about disappearing tracks in the snow. And this gets back to Henry Franzoni's theory about this interaction process and Tom Powell's theory and Ron Moorhead's theory. And so I said, well, do you have any pictures? And he showed me the pictures of the tracks disappearing in the snow out in the middle of a prairie. And they were, naked footprints coming down from this same mountain. So I didn't mention Mary's situation with the pit bulls around the way. I wanted to keep it a clean research area for a bit. And he said, you know what, you go up on that mountain, but take my grandson with you. And he'll show you around. And that whole mountain is mine up to the point where the helo pad is. And then past the old abandoned helo pad, which was just basically a mowed area where there was a grassy circle, kind of like a landscape crop circle. We got into this area one evening with his grandson, who was a little bit on the spectrum. He's a super nice kid, almost, very innocent, almost a little Forrest Gumpy. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but he was just a very interesting little kid.
Yeah.
And knew his way around and definitely hadn't been up that mountain as far as I was going to take him. So we get into this abandoned helo pad one evening, and I set up my tent. And he helps me set up this, very lightweight mosquito netted tent. And we put like one stake in it on the side of the tent. We put my maps and candy wrappers out in front of right in front of the tent, and kind of research our plan for the evening. And sun's going down. It's like a July or August night, clear, no wind, and nothing has happened. And there's this old trail. And I said, well, what goes up this trail? And he goes, well, old widow Gettings lives up here, and she's probably, I don't know, she must be 100 years old. And I said, okay, well, there's nobody up here but us then. So we get up there and we're looking out over the valley, and I have my binoculars faced back to where my tent should be, only my tent's gone. So we rush back, and this had been maybe 35 minutes.
The tent's gone?
It's gone. So we're looking around for my tent, and it's stuck 45 feet up, 45 feet away up on top of a rhododendron bush, which is about 8 feet tall. And it's sitting up there facing the same direction. Nothing been disturbed on the ground. The tent fly had actually been pulled down and neatly set next to the tent. The tent was just placed. In fact, it was placed kind of it had been pulled along the grass and kind of set up on top of the roadies. But nothing had been taken. None of the candy wrappers had been moved. Everything was kind of right where we had left it. And his mouth just went slack-jawed. And I was pretty surprised at it too, because we knew there was no wind coming in on us. So I was still, a skeptical witness to this whole thing. And so I went back up with this gal, Beth, and we went up a couple weeks later, and we tested it during a windstorm to see if that tent would move, even if there was a strong gale, and the tent just wouldn't blow away because it had so much mosquito netting. And that's when we saw these giant lights appear in the woods. And Beth, she was way out in Flute Playerville, and I was just still kind of nursing that possibility that there was this connection between the supernatural and Sasquatch. Well, when you see these lights in Bigfoot areas, they beg to get your attention.
Mm-hmm.
These lights we saw were pyrotechnic sized lights. I mean, they belonged, in a Kiss concert. They were just giant, arc welder, bright, 45 in diameter lights that exploded in the woods. And it was a very obvious experience, but it was right where this tent had been moved. It was within the area where we had, heard reports.
Mm-hmm.
And these lights, they stair step through the trees 4 different times. And what I mean by that is each time they would explode this brilliant white light, it was almost not a light as much as it was the absence of darkness.
Mm-hmm.
It would just explode right in front of us 4 different times. And it took about 30 minutes for each one of them to appear. And that changed everything for me, David, because it said, okay, I could see why people think, there is some kind of connection to what's going on in the woods and them, because, here they told me this would happen, and eventually I would have to deal with it.
Yeah.
So we ran down, like a couple of acres and made sure there's no game cams or, paparazzi hiding in the trees, and, made sure that it wasn't ball lightning, but it was a full moon night. It was a beautiful fall night, and then not a cloud in the sky when it happened. So that begun, working that hillside, and I worked that hill and had similar experiences that, just go without defining an explanation, including having something run up behind you in broad daylight, pounding its feet and coming within 12 inches of your backside and then stopping suddenly. I've seen it. I know I walked up trails and turned my back and seen mice or little tiny varmints pulled in half, where the blood is still oozing out of them as though something had come out of the bushes, pinched something, stuck it in the trail, and the blood is gushing out of the animal as I turn around. Almost, how do you take something like that? You either take it as, well, maybe I stepped on it and killed this little guy. But if it happens enough in concert with something running up behind you, you start to think, okay, I can understand how people think there's a connection here. And now I'm one of them. How do I begin to approach this, and who do I talk to? Because as you well know, and I well know, the parties divide quickly into liberal and conservative, who you're going to vote for and who you're going to hang out with. And it gets that divisive, as politics does, between a religious person and an atheist. And
well, coming from my perspective, it does for them. Not me. I don't, I kind of deal in facts, and facts are facts.
Right.
And that's okay if you have something else you believe. I'm fine with that.
Right.
Whatever.
Yeah, and a lot of people, they don't have a lighthearted sense of humor about this. This is supposed to be, oh, by the way, this is supposed to be fun, right?
I can't tell you.
People forget that at the end of the day, that this is supposed to be a magical, fun experience, even though there's consequences for a lot of people seeing these.
I've actually
you've run into these people.
Just doing what I do. I just take some basic stuff. I turn them into awesome campfire stories for people. Here it's like 60% entertainment, 40%, of this stuff right here that kind of backs up those kind of campfire stories. But just the word stories, for a few out here, just kind of sets them off. And it's not that I care, because I just don't.
Right.
And I've told them that. It's like, I don't care. I don't think you understand. I don't care.
You're not invested like they are. Some people are so personally invested in their own, small box that they carry around with them, where their reality for that moment, they want it compacted in that tiny little box. But as well as I do, around the campfire, that box disappears. and they start
The
telling you
box
about how there
always
is no box.
appears around
Yeah,
the
yeah,
campfire. Me, there's people
yeah,
out here that people ask me about, Dogman and stuff. I'm not really, to be honest, and everybody knows this, I'm not really a true believer in that yet. I don't know anything about it. As a matter of fact, I'm not really interested in the subject. Mine is more Bigfoot, some sort
right,
of North American primate running around the mountains.
right.
I'm more of, that's just me. That's my passion. That's what I'm into. Um, uh, just that's really, I mean, I'm like you, but when you get around the campfire, it's like everybody has their own campfire stories. And it
Yeah.
doesn't mean just because you use the word stories doesn't make it any less true. Native Americans have tons of stories.
Oh gosh,
That's,
yeah. None of them are really flesh and blood
I'm
stories.
trying, yeah,
They're speaking, yeah, they're speaking about a spirit animal,
yeah.
and oftentimes they get pushed aside as kind of like you know
Well, I always
passionate
tell
about
people,
their oral tradition.
yeah,
Yeah,
what do you do with the word history?
yeah.
It's like,
Story, right? Yeah,
what do
you
you
kind
do
of
with
forget
that?
about that.
You just kind of leave
Yeah,
the end out, I guess,
yeah.
so,
Well, in
for
his
me,
story and her story, because sometimes the women's stories, they have more of a ring of authenticity to them, just based upon the fact that I think women are prone to the feelings when they're out there a lot more than
yeah.
the men who are, in protective mode, and they're kind of shutting that part of
I've
them
always
down.
found fishermen,
Mm.
hunters, and women to be pretty reliable sources out here. And I know fishermen and hunters will always tell me that they just about bag the biggest one and whatever. But when it
Right.
comes down to the authenticity of their, Bigfoot encounter stories and things like that, I'm telling you, I have never heard people that just sound so authentic with what
Yeah.
they're talking about. It's as if they're standing there looking back at that day as if it was happening right then, and you're just listening to them. One of my favorites was of the bow hunter up in Washington, from Sasquatch Chronicles. And it was one of
Mm-hmm.
the first 7 or 10, actually it's probably the first 5 or 6 interviews that they did. You could look back then, and it says, hunter's experience. And I'm telling you, that has to be one of the most authentic encounter stories I've ever heard. It was
Oh
great.
gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, the resource of witnesses that feel obliged now to come forward and tell their story with their first and last name never existed in 2010. The idea that finding Bigfoot has uh, ruined, research, I think is totally ridiculous, because it's given the witness permission slips to talk about this, like Whitley Strieber did with Communion. Once that image
Hmm.
of the gray on the cover of Communion came out, it changed the dynamic, and people were compelled to talk about these abduction experiences in a way that they hadn't felt comfortable
Yes.
previously. So you see that again with, Animal Planet's decision to do this. Now, did they parlay it into a cartoon version of what we all do out there? Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a kid show, and I think Cliff would say that too. To a
Hmm.
degree, it was kind of a kid
Well,
show, but
Cliff, Cliff,
um,
Cliff also started doing his own thing with the puppets and everything. But you got to remember, Cliff is a teacher. He
oh
taught
yeah,
school.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
to educate
yeah.
in different ways for him, especially towards a younger generation,
Yeah, I think
is
that
just
was
kind
his
of a
goal, to
natural thing.
parlay this into a kids show after Finding Bigfoot was done, and I don't know
Mhm.
if that will ever happen. But yeah, kids are another good witness to talk to too. In fact, down from Mary's house and the Navy SEALs house, there was a family, a young man named Eric, and he told me about us. Him and his sister were waiting for a school bus outside, and they heard a turkey coming, and that was nothing unusual. And the turkey turned out to be a Sasquatch doing a turkey impression as it walked across the road towards the McKenzie drainage. It stepped
Mhm.
over like a 5 foot tall metal
Just right
fence
down towards the
and
river.
did turkey calls. Yeah, and was just heading towards actually a resort, which is right on the McKenzie. And you'll get reports of the Sasquatch coming down the McKenzie, and a group of them slapping the water near fishermen, and basically, stunning the fish, I guess, is probably what they're
Yeah.
doing, stunning the trout, and grabbing them quick. And they're, wading out in the water that would come up over our head, and it's only up to their waist.
Hmm.
and slapping the water in front of fly fishermen. So maybe that's what these were doing. But kids, kids are more open to these experiences. They're
Yeah.
also open to, making up something fantastic. And I get that. But my son is a witness and I'm not. And I think that might have something to do with the fact that their willingness to show themselves to children. Well, what's a kid going to do? You know what I mean? It's a whole different
Yeah.
scenario when you show yourself to a child than when you show yourself to his mom or dad. But we were following up on a report of a husband and wife that were both Jewish. And it was a day of fasting coming up. And so before their big fast, they went up into the woods and they had a big barbecue.
Hmm.
And so they had Sasquatch come in while they were camping up the McKenzie.
Oh, wow.
And the guy was very animated about the story. And he said, I'll take you there, but I need to be back home before dark because I'm not hanging out there after dark. And
Yeah.
so this is where we started researching. And this is where kind of my permanent, I guess off-grid camping spot would be, which is on the border of the Three Sisters Wilderness and the McKenzie Willamette Middle Fork. And there's been some pretty incredible encounters up there. And luckily, they're not
I've
just
actually got
happening
a
to
couple
me.
that I will be working on over the summer that I received in my email from up the
Yeah.
McKenzie River, and not that far out there
Okay.
either. Kind of like
Yeah.
just past the edge of where the national forest starts. I mean, it's not
Oh
that
yeah.
far
Yeah.
out.
No, they had a pretty bad forest fire last year. So
Hmm.
some of the areas that I, worked in, what used to be underbrush is now all burnt, brown cedar and fir trees. But so those areas we've had some success in, including, I bring once in a while I'll bring some people with me that want to see my private camping area, which you have to hike in 45 minutes off the trail with these secret flags I have hidden. And out there you'll find a little semi shelter that I've made kind of Ron Moorhead style. And so that people get foot rubs through their tent when they're
Yeah.
camping at these spots here. You'll feel kind of a poke through the fabric of your hammock or tent. You'll hear trees get thrown out there. You'll see strange lights, and it's these things are fleeting and they're on the periphery, but there seems to be getting to know you process and seeing how much you can hang with them process. And so it's a matter of going there over a period of years and
I
just
think
being open to the
I
experience.
met and got to hang out with Ori for a few days,
Ori?
couple days. Ori, he lives out that way.
Oh, okay.
Had some. I think it's him and his son or something up there that do a lot of research up that way as well.
Okay. I haven't met them yet.
Hmm.
Um, and then you mentioned the London tracks. Now that was 2012 on February 16th, I believe.
Hmm.
And I was working hospice at that time for a guy that was on his way out, and him and his wife had kind of ingratiated me into their family, and so I lived down the street from him, and I wanted more time to be out in the field, so I would take these kind of little odd jobs to nurse my Bigfoot time. So I get this text from my son, a very anxious Jude, and it's his name, and he said, Dad, you got your smartphone on?" I said, "Yeah," and he goes, "Well, there's a guy at my door and he's got a Bigfoot track on his phone." And I said, "Well, let me talk to him." So this guy named Max Roy was walking his dog down past my son's house, and he saw a Bigfoot sticker on his car, and he happened to have a Bigfoot track photograph on his phone. So he sent me this incredible picture of what looked like an authentic Bigfoot track on the Cottage Grove Lake. And he says, "I don't know the validity of any of this, but I thought maybe it'd be interesting to tell you about it if you want to go down there and see tracks. I think they're still there." And so we went that night, and it was me and a guy I'll call Tracker. And so this guy Tracker and I began to find these three tracks, very obvious 45-inch apart, 14-inch tracks. And there's three of them, and they're coming out of a poison oak Weyerhaeuser Road, a poison oak filled Weyerhaeuser Road. And it was about 12 o'clock at night, and we'd never cast anything before. So we did our due diligence and filmed everything, and we got it all ready to do our first casting with. And so we're waiting for the plaster to dry, which it didn't dry that well that night because we mixed it too thin. I said, I got to work in the morning, but Tracker, if you go down here, I would look out over the lake bed and start walking out on that lake bed because this is where the tracks are headed. And so I get this frantic phone call from Tracker, and he says, dude, there's like 120 tracks down here, and there's no other footprints. There's not another boot print down here. And Tracker's a good old boy. I mean, he spent a lot of time hunting, and hanging out with the right people his whole life in Cottage Grove. So when he said there's no other boot prints, there's no other prints, and they're coming out on the lake bed, and there's over 100, I think he said like over 150 at the time. I said, okay, well, that's too big a job for us, first of all.
Yeah, they ended up casting like 70 something of them, right?
What's that?
Didn't they end up casting about 70 something?
Yeah, we casted 126 of those footprints.
Oh, 126.
126. Yeah. They weren't all castable, and they weren't. We started running out of hydrocal, and it took. At one time, there was over 2 or 3 days. There was probably, I don't know, 6 bags of Fix It All and hydrocal, and everybody came down here to see these tracks, and they kind of split up between 5 or 6 researchers over a period of 4 days, and the validity of these trackways is up in the air because the toes on the tracks don't spread out in any measurable difference. And the London tracks look very different compared to other tracks. They just are very unique looking. They have a flat edge to the top of them on the parabolic end. And when Jeff Meldrum took these tracks, he put them through a digital resonance scanner and did a 3D mapping of them to see if we could find dermals or anything. And Cliff feels now, 100%, according to his last talk I had with him, that these tracks aren't authentic. But the thing about these tracks is that, if you're to buy what Todd said, these tracks came down not only off of the lake bed, but they came down through private property, according to what this tracker guy said. And they came down from the mountain ridge. They walked over a fence. They came across the main London road. They went through Poison Oak on this old Weyerhaeuser road, kind of snooped around and came off in the lake bed and did this kind of big 180 and then kind of just disappeared, kind of like the way that the old Navy SEAL guy said that. So it's been 6 years. Nobody has ever come forward and claim this openly. There's one guy that claims that he did it. He refuses to take my phone calls or show us how he could have hoaxed these tracks. So as for now, I'm 50-50 on these tracks. And it's not because I'm passionate
but you're
about
one
all
of
the
those
work.
original guys out there looking at that stuff. And so.
Yeah, but I care more about the truth than I do about whether or not these tracks are real. I just want to get to the bottom of it. In fact, if someone did these tracks, they were an experiencer because they did things that seemed quite fishy and implausible, including like this 90-degree turn. Cliff believes that he did this running in the mud. If someone did this, they did it running, and that's how they did the foot gait. But if they were running, they stopped on a dime on their right foot, and they did a 90-degree turn without spinning out in the mud. They just stopped, and they pivoted on the ball of their foot and did kind of a military left dress left. And that turn is indicative of the sunny. I don't know if you followed up on Paul Gray's experience in the snow, but Paul Gray's followed the trackway very similar, a lot bigger though. And they were doing 90-degree turns in the snow. And you'll hear this again from people that see them about the fluidity and how they can kind of move like a hummingbird or a mosquito, almost like they have hyper intelligence on direction and are able to pivot on a dime.
Yeah.
So we were able to address those things in the trackway and document them. So there's issues with someone that comes forward and claims that they hoax these. They have to be able to explain and duplicate how they're able to do these very squatchy things. And I'm all game for a good show privately. If someone listens to this and they're local and they love good Bigfoot stories, my interest isn't to out you and to make your name public. I just want to be taken aside and said, hey, this is how I did it. You know, I feel bad that all you guys came down there and wasted your time, whatever. I think it's just a really cool exercise to show us, similar how they faked the LB trackway, which if there was ever any comparison between two large trackways, it was the hoaxed tracks of LB, where they even chartered an airplane. Ron Moore had chartered an airplane to document this trackway. Every Bigfooter known to mankind went up to LB to cast giant hoaxed footprints.
Yeah.
And this was done by a guy named, I believe, Aaron Swepton, who, I don't know if he had a bone to pick with people or what, or if it was a throwdown to cliffs, based upon the London trackways. Like, well, I can hoax footprints, but this guy was able to take his own foot and somehow enlarge his foot on silicone into like a 18-inch track. And it was very realistic looking print in the silt of a volcanic slough that was coming down in I believe, the Rainier Valley. But yeah, that everybody was fooled by the LB trackways, and they're doing publicity shots of them and sending them out all over the internet. And then they found out, this is too good to be true, and maybe we should take a step back. And you just have to be willing to do that. Sometimes these things are too good to be true, and you have to eat crow. And if we have to do that over the LB trackway, or what now we call the owl moon prints, which
it's okay to eat crow.
I'd love to talk to you about.
Matter of fact, it's not really about eating crow as much as it is just finding out that, okay, these were faked. Let's move on and get to the real stuff. That's how you sift through it. I mean, that's how you sift through, facts and fiction. I mean, that's the whole job of research, finding facts to your theories, getting through the fiction, getting through the things that just don't fit, finding out why they don't fit, and then moving on to what does fit and finding out why it does fit. So you're really just kind of sifting through, facts and fiction. So,
well, there's a temptation for guys to really, nurse their ego when they have a major discovery, even before they check out their facts. So at that point, the crow is being fully digested, and it's just waiting.
Well, it's like you said about the box earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, they're so they're so stuck in this little tiny jewelry box of themselves that it's eating crow for them is just turning over in their grave, basically. It's just, it's hard.
Oh yeah. And then you'll see that time and time again where they won't exactly say anything about the point where they've come out of their little box, but they'll suddenly drop out of research. And I have to wonder if someone like Ron Olson, the guy I mentioned originally that I went to church with, this director, producer, he had studied and looked into Bigfoot all through the 1970s. He was the guy that built the Bigfoot cages that are on tour down in Southern Oregon. That was Ron Olson that came up with that.
There.
Okay, so this is a guy.
Ashland.
He spent all his time and money out in Cay Falls, and then suddenly dropped it and won't even talk to another Bigfoot researcher. And what I've come to find out is once people wrap their mind around this, that this isn't a flesh and blood phenomena, that there's this other connective tissue involved, it gets them very uncomfortable about how they spent their time over the last 20 years. And rather than say anything or eat crow, they just suddenly stop. And it's usually the guys that do this, not the women. But I've seen it over the last 11 or 12 years. And so, I want to be a voice and an advocate for these researchers that have these issues with it, because I get it. I understand how disturbing the consequences maybe could be, but I don't think they're nefarious or disturbing. I think that it's scary, because it's the unknown, and we have an extreme unknown going on. And that's why I do this thing called Strange Brow, which is, Brau is the German name for brewery or beer. And so I started
Yeah,
this.
and everybody, you guys can get over there to the YouTube channel and subscribe to that, Strange Brow. So
yeah, actually, if you go on Facebook and go to Strange Brow,
and
BRAU, or go on strangebrow.com, you can see where I've headed. It's not in Bigfoot direction anymore. We still our mascot is a Sasquatch with a giant spiral
what
in the
isn't in the
frontal lobe
Pacific
because
Northwest?
yeah, right, yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. So we've got this mascot that has a Sasquatch on it now, and it's got this giant spiral in the frontal lobe, which represents what a lot of people are talking about, how they have this heightened frontal lobe area, and maybe that's the pineal gland. We decided to include it in our logo because it seemed fitting for the foundation of all the weirdness that me and my son have experienced and everybody else. But we meet every last Sunday in Cottage Grove at a place called the Axe and Fiddle, which I would describe kind of as Twin Peaks meets a TED Talk environment. So for 3 hours, we digest through either live streaming or local researchers or interested parties to talk about different phenomena related to paranormal conspiracies. So we started off with Sasquatch, and we started off with Chris Meniere's futon prints that he cast with Cliff. And he brought in a really nice high-def color copy of what the prints did. Chris Meniere is a fantastic researcher. And so after he was done doing his presentation, about 2 weeks after that, Daryl and I, he drew a tag for a last-minute elk hunt. And he had a section of land behind his house where he could go out and do one final elk hunt. I think it was the end of March. It was the Friday before Easter. It was also called the Blue Moon, the Owl Moon, Good Friday. And so it was on this full moon. We're in this back area, and Daryl is a Bigfoot witness, him and his brother. And so aside from elk hunting, he wanted to show me where these stick structures were. And so I said, okay, that's fine. That's cool. Let's go. And so I'm sitting in the passenger side of his truck. It's about 2:00 in the afternoon, a beautiful sunny day. And I say, Daryl, stop. And so back up his little car, his truck, and we see these divots on the side of the road. And these divots have depth to them, but they're not footprints and they're not handprints. They look like a joint. They look like something had kneeled down like in the red clay, like two knees. And the left one, the dirt had kind of slid into what appears to be a left knee, but the right one is totally pristine. And so as we're looking down in here, I said, start rolling film. So we started rolling film immediately, and people can go on Strange Brow on YouTube, and they can go on the Strange Brow website, or you can go on the Owl Moon print on Facebook and join our Facebook page, and you can see a 5-minute clip of what was 4K video of us extracting what looked like human hair out of these 5-inch deep craters in the earth. And they have hair flow in them. They seem to show what looks like articulation. There seems to be the beginnings of a shin. And we grab a bag of Fix-It-All because we didn't have hydrocal on it, and we pulled out these massive, 35, 40-inch impressions from the earth and secured them back at his place with these hairs that we sent up to Cindy Dosen. So I call up Cindy Dosen. I'm like, hey, Cindy, I got these hairs, and I recorded the process so you know that they're completely clean. And she goes, well, I don't do DNA. I run this hominid enigma program, and largely, what I get are known animals. But the video you're sending me looks fairly interesting, so I'll definitely take a look, and I'll do it free of charge. And so I said, well, do me one better. We want to have the second Strange Brow, and it's going to be on ghost, and we're going to talk about poltergeist, and we have guests coming in that are going to talk about that. But for the last 10 minutes,
video up right here so people can see it and find it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I said, if I don't get the report back, great. I don't want to know what you find with this hair, though, until you come in as a Skype guest and tell the audience, after they watch this 5-minute video you're showing people on the big screen, And if this is a Geraldo moment where the Al Capone vault is empty, then it's an example of process and transparency, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And you can tell everybody that we found elk prints, and, you know, that's fine. Well, she didn't say that. You know, she said, no, take a step back. You know, what you and Daryl and Cindy have done is you've given me the 7th hair out of 250 or something like that of an unknown species type hair that matches a juvenile Sasquatch that Scott Taylor cast. And the audience is just like, what? You know, what? And so I was just totally floored. Even though looking back at how crazy these impressions are, I was just so used to the fact that it was something more mundane than interesting. So she sent us back this incredible manifesto, this report, which I'll release tomorrow on the internet. Now, some people are running around with this report.
Share the link with me so I can get over there to that.
Oh, yeah. In fact,
I'd love
if
to
people
share
go
that with everybody.
So if people go on Strange Brow on YouTube, the live stream broke apart last time, but I think we're good this one, and we'll definitely record it properly.
Okay.
But we'll release the report during the last part around 4:45 tomorrow, and everyone can go out there and contact Cindy Dosen and talk about the hair. But we're actually able to, last week, I booked up to, Daryl couldn't come with me, and I ran up to the UFO McMinnville Festival where Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp were speaking, and passed off the chain of custody with an actual hair sample to George Knapp. And I said, George, this is, you know, a Sasquatch hair reportedly with a report from the Hominid Enigma, and here's how to get in contact with me and Daryl. And he said, great, fantastic. And so my plan is to step away from the owl moon prints until the fall right now, because I've got another project I'm working on for Ron Moorhead. In fact, we're trying to build another life-size Sasquatch for Ron to pose next to.
Nice.
If people go on to the Strange Brow website, they'll see what is called the Sierra Sasquatch Experience. And 15 people in September can come spend 2 days with Ron in a recreated setting up in the woods and stand with Ron and pose near a recreated shelter with a life-size Sasquatch. And we'll take some old-timey 1970s type pictures. And then have a fireside chat with Ron. We're doing a barbecue, and so I only have 15 tickets of those, and I just released them like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
So once those are gone, they're gone, and those are up on the website. And
that's strangebrow.com.
So
so everybody knows that. And follow Strange Brow on YouTube and Facebook. I'll go ahead and share those links out tomorrow. It is about time for me to wrap this up, buddy. Are you planning on doing some more research out there this summer?
Right. So we're doing a raffle and some trivia for guests of Strange Brow. If you show up at Strange Brow, we're going to have trivia in July, and whoever wins this trivia, we're going to take out to the ECETI Ranch, where you're going to have crazy experiences for sure. But we do what are called the strange browsings or field trips once a month, and there are different themes. So we're having a casting class. That's only $10. We'll provide everything, and then we have a UFO hunt, and then we're doing the ECETI Ranch, and then we're getting ready for the Sierra Sasquatch thing.
Awesome. All right, man. All right. Well, I will go ahead and stick on here for just a second, Toby, but I want to say thank you guys very much out here at the PacWest Bigfoot community, and I'll get some of these links out that Toby's mentioned, and so that way you guys can get out there, subscribe to him, and everybody, and just connect with him if you guys have any more questions or have anything to share with him, especially up, down here in the Southern Oregon region. So with that, thank you guys very much. Thank you, Toby. Hold on one second, buddy.